All right, we have
Okay, welcome to the
fancy chair.
we got Switch 9 in the bigger room, which was fortuitous because I think this would have had overflow in there. Arrival in. How many of you never been to Video Game Maker tonight? Okay. So we do this monthly. You know, our focus pretty much it's turned out to sort of be video game companies. We've had some big hitters in here. We had
Cloud Imperium will do karaoke.
We had Cloud Imperium in here, as well as Richard Garriott and all of their crew. So I'm going to dispense with all the stuff we usually do so we can get right into this. Normally we go through opportunities and who's looking and who's zooming and who wants opportunities and who's got some and that sort of thing. So we do this monthly, and I'm your dear organizer, so I get to carry the chairs back when the super done with what they're doing. One of the people who sits in the other room religiously like a devoted Roman Catholic going to church is Gordon Walton. He sits by the window and can never take his place. Well, he's had a stealth company along with a bunch of other firms, which you know about. It's called Crowfall, which is now, they'll give you the stats on the Kickstarter campaign, but it's I think number 15 in video games is the last time I looked. And it's interesting because this company is very similar to Cloud Imperium, which we sort of partially claim is an Austin company from a crowdfunding perspective. And Richard's thing as well, his Kickstarter campaign, you know, started and pulled it off onto their own site as Cloud did. Anyway, they, just went through the ceiling. They went out looking for 800K, and, you're obnoxiously posting your current total here. And they still, they'll still accept donations. They'll talk about all that. So this is a really interesting concept. If you know, we talked a little about the trends. I think in February, just kind of a forecast. And MMO is like, it ain't going away. In fact, it's the largest single growth segment in the whole video games world. And there's sort of this just renaissance of all this stuff happening. And this is just incredibly exciting that we've got these guys here tonight. So give them a hand, and I'm going to turn it over and give a shot.
So I think we'll just start by talking about ArtCraft Entertainment and how we got started. And before we do that, we'll introduce everybody up front here. We'll start with Mr. Mike, because he's the most important person here.
Well, he got that right, didn't he? Actually, no. I'm Mike. I've worked in the Austin games industry for about, I didn't want to say it.
Go ahead and say it.
All right, 25 years. Started with Richard Garriott and Warren Spector on the Ultima series. Yada, 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 Crowfall. And I'm I work on the client side on the Unity engine on Crowfall.
Thank you, Mr. Mike.
You're welcome.
Howdy, everybody. My name's Thomas Blair. I've been making games since 2002, I think. Yeah, I know. Sitting next to these guys, it's kind of interesting. I'm not the most important, but I'm probably the one who's going to get the blame for everything, especially from any community people who are here. They love to blame design for messing up PvP or whatever.
I'm going to blame you. So.
Well, you're going to blame me.
That helps.
Todd said if there's anything broken with any ability, it's definitely my fault, which it's true.
Uncle Bob.
Yeah, I'm also, if you've seen the Kickstarter video, I play Uncle Bob, which was great. Todd came up with that idea like one afternoon, and it was like, all right, I'll go rent a military uniform. I pulled my ribbons off of my actual dress blue uniform because I don't fit into it anymore. As you can tell, I've grown. What's that?
Number 5.
Raw. So yeah, EverQuest, DC Universe, Star Wars Galaxies are all in my past, and now I get to make fun happen on Crowfall.
Cool. I'm Thomas Sitch. I'm kind of Mike's counterpart. Also been with this operation in pre-production leading up to the Kickstarter. I've been almost a pure MMO guy going back to the Shadowbane days, and I have the distinction of being, I guess, the only person who's been on each of Todd's ventures in the video game arena. So it's it's like the Seven Samurai. It's a lot of fun. It's pretty awesome.
My name is Todd Coleman. You probably, if you've seen the video, saw me laughing and joking my way through it and stumbling. If you actually could see all the footage, you would realized that maybe that was about 5 minutes out of like 700 minutes of actual footage. So it made me look like I'm more or less competent and able to speak. In actuality, I don't know that that's true. So I'm one of the two founders, Gordon being the other founder of ArtCraft. My previous games, I'm a game director. I also serve as executive producer, but really I'm a design first guy. My first game was an MMO called Shadowbane. I was creative director on that, and which is kind of funny. It's like deciding to set out and create an independent film. So let's go make Titanic, and in more ways than one, given that it was Shadowbane. And then my second game and third game were both at a company here in town called King's Isle Entertainment. I did a game called Wizard 101 and a follow-on game with that called Pirate 101. So this is actually my fourth game, which for Mike is like a laughably small number, but it does mean I've been in the industry for still over a decade. I've been doing this a long time. My projects just tend to last a long time, and I am almost always, the first guy to turn on the lights at the beginning, and I see it all the way through launch and beyond before I disengage and go start another. So.
I'm the other founder, Gordon Walton, and I'm just your gratuitous old game guy. That's my job.
Not a noob.
Yeah, not a noob. Yeah, every once in a while I can find somebody who can call me a noob, but it's pretty rare. Yeah, and I think that the fun thing here is that we're getting to do something that's going to break some boundaries, and that's what keeps me making games. It's not the process of making games is not that interesting. Making games that affect the market is very interesting. Breaking rules and making new rules is why I got into MMOs in the first place. So it's a great venue for doing that. And now we should probably talk about how we started this crazy company, and Todd tells that story so much better than I do.
All right, so I'll tell this story again, and hopefully I won't screw it up and get it out of order. So I had this feeling, basically, I've been at King's Isle for 8 years. And I was the first guy hired in Austin. We built that company from me and Joseph, who's running it now. He was my college roommate, and we basically built it from, in Austin. We were the first two guys, and by the time I left, I think we were 220. So I saw the ramp really go from nothing to a very, very large organization. As a part of that also, though, I saw my role change from entrepreneur startup, let's figure out how we're going to make this game, to now I'm a manager, right? Like I have a lot of employees. And so I started feeling a bit of creative stagnation. And I had this idea, well, the other problem was the company was not mine, right? At the end of the day, I was one of the earliest people there, but I didn't own it. And I had always been an entrepreneur starting companies. So I had this idea that had been in the back of my head that after we shipped, it started really before we even did the second game, before Pirate. But I felt strongly like there was still more story to tell there. We got that game out, and that was in like October a couple years ago. And then in January, I came in and said, I've decided it's time for me to go. I need to go do something else. And so it was a fine, pleasant parting of the ways. There was no issues with it. And it was a little shocking and surprising, I think, to everybody, not the least of which being my wife. So I had this idea that I would go then and meet with the various people around town that like Gordon, that I'd never worked with Gordon before. We're the kind of guys that always start these projects, and so these are 5 to 7 year projects. So the stars never align in such a way that we are usually free at the same time, and we also have our own gigs. Like we always go and start these projects. So I had my idea that I would go to each of these guys individually. There's only a couple of us, and sit down for lunch and like spring my big news on them. And so I met with Gordon for lunch, and we sat down, and I was about to rock out with I've left, and he goes, so I've decided I'm going to leave Disney and I'm going to start my own company. And I was like, stole my thunder. Sucked so bad. So
that's my job.
Yeah. So we talked through that lunch about what kind of company I wanted to create and what kind of company he wanted to create, and then we went to a coffee and very quickly realized that the company that I wanted to create and the company he wanted to create should be the same company. Like we wanted to create that same company. And it was also very interesting, right? Because I'm used to working with partners, he's used to working with partners. Both of the people we've worked with in the past were not available because they were doing other things. And we have very complementary strengths, right? I'm more design focused, he's more production focused. So that's really where the craziness started. It was like, all right, well, let's start talking about what kind of company we want to create. And that segued into, okay, well, what do we want to do that can really shake up the market, that can really be interesting? And I said, I've got this idea of an approach that I want to take, a new approach to an old problem. And so that's
anything but a wild clone.
Yeah, yeah. So that's really where the genesis happened. And so we spent kind of the beginning period going and finding key individuals that could come up in and help, like Mike and Thomas, and then later Blair, that could come and help us figure out what that game vision was. And then we started saying, okay, how are we going to fund this thing? So we put in money ourselves, and then we raised money from friends and family, and we took a little bit of money elsewhere. And then we started looking at crowdfunding and said, this is a really cool idea for a couple reasons. Obviously, the money is great, but it also gives you the ability to go and aggregate your community early, right? Which is really the business we're in at the end of the day. What we really do is we create online communities that hopefully stick together for years and years and years and years. So that's at the core. I think that was kind of the genesis of where all this came from.
Yeah, and Mike and Thomas were the first people hired, for the team, and Mr. Blair got hired a little later when we finally said, well, yeah, we can afford a designer. Well, other than Todd, because Todd's out of control. But this is part of the deal, right? So I think it'd be interesting for you to talk a little bit about the genesis of the idea for Crowfall, and where the learning came from, what the pain points were in the past, and if the guys have something to chip in, that'd be awesome.
Yeah. So I'll go through that pretty quick because I don't want to just have it be you guys listening to me. You hear me enough on the videos. So the basic concept way back when of Shadowbane was a really cool idea, right? And the actual genesis of that idea was probably like Braveheart as much as anything else, maybe Gladiator. But we really liked that idea of the large-scale battles. And we were all reading a series of books that at the time nobody had ever heard of called Game of Thrones. You might have heard of it now. But we really liked this idea of having an MMO where you're bringing thousands of people together. Traditional MMOs, though, you're not really doing much with them, right? The fact that you've got these 1,000 people together, you stick them into a world that the world basically doesn't care if there's 1,000 people online or 10,000 or 15. Like, it doesn't make any difference. They're basically massively multiplayer, single-player games. And so the idea of letting players get together and have an effect on other players, not just in an open world sense, but actually having structure to it. Like, we're gathering together into teams with an actual purpose, and those teams can go up against each other and they can win or they can lose. Really, really compelling idea. Really, really cool. And this was all before World of Warcraft. So back then, nobody knew what this market potential really was. Ultima Online was successful, and so people knew there was a lot of money here, but there was no quote unquote right way to build an MMO. It's just nobody had made enough of them for us to know the right or the wrong way to do it. So you saw a huge amount of experimentation at the beginning, not just us, but Dark Age of Camelot, Asheron's Call, which had this crazy fealty tree system where I could not even be online, but if you were my vassal, you could collect experience points and that would level me up even if I wasn't online. And you had EverQuest. You had all this experimentation going on, and it was really interesting. And some of those experiments went well, and some of them went terrible, and most of them came out somewhere in the middle. But then you had the market kind of hit a point where everyone believed EverQuest was the largest an MMO would ever get. Like, the basic mindset at the time, the pre-WoW, was, well, we figured out in our wisdom that there's only 400,000 people in the entire world that are interested in a game like this. So from now on, if you want to fund your game, you're going to just be trading those players. You're going to be cannibalizing EverQuest. That was the basic thought. So then all of a sudden, WoW comes out, right? And WoW comes out of the gate strong, and immediately it's like, ooh, it's a challenger to EverQuest. Oh, wait, it looks like it's passing EverQuest. Oh, wait, did they hit 1 million? That's crazy. And fast forward, now we're at 12 million, and people are like, okay, we have no idea, we can't predict. So every publisher, every person that was interested in looking at WoW wanted to fund a game only if your pitch hit this basic model. We're going to do WoW kind of numbers, and the way we're going to do that is we're going to be WoW but with blank. And so if you pitch something that was WoW with blank, it almost didn't matter what you put in the blank, they would be interested. So if you said, we're going to make WoW with Jedi, that sounds great, let's go do that. We're going to make WoW with Wizards and Wizard School, that sounds great. I mean, everything was basically wrapped around the concept of it has to be linear content, narrative storytelling, single player but massively multiplayer style gaming, because if you do that, that's a model that works, and these games are really expensive, so that's how you reduce risk. So that was kind of the basic situation for many, many years, is the only thing that could get made was WoW with blank. And then crowdfunding came along. And so now all of a sudden, people who are making the decision what checks to sign and therefore what games get made aren't just the people who are looking at the spreadsheet saying, how do I make another WoW with blank? They're all of a sudden now the players who can say, hey, am I interested in this game or not? And if I am, then I'm going to chip $30 into the pot, and that pot can get big enough that we can actually make something different. So there you go. That's my long-winded how we got from there through WoW to now what I consider the post-WoW era. And interestingly enough to me, the people who are doing it are a lot of the same familiar names and faces that we saw do it originally, right? Like Richard Garriott and Mark Jacobs and us. It's not that we didn't want to experiment and want to do something else. It's that we couldn't get the money to do it. And without the money, you can't make the games. So,
yeah. Anybody want to add anything?
Oh, he hit it all.
That's what I was afraid of.
Yeah, he just kept going. Yeah, and I think it's really cool from a design perspective to be able to go back to my EverQuest roots and actually see some of the systems that we just never really got to do the +1 version of. I mean, in games, it's always about taking something, +1ing it, and seeing where that goes. And a lot of those things just died back then because everybody had to make everything like WoW, otherwise you couldn't get it funded.
Actually, and that segues to something I want you to talk about. So you've been playing on an old school EverQuest, your screensaver came up by the way,
Oh.
You may not care. But you've been playing on an old school EverQuest server,
Right.
and have noticed things have been left behind. Can you chat about that?
Yeah, I mean, so I play on Project 1999 every couple nights. I play a lot of games. My wife's a gamer too, so we have a lot of fun gaming and exploring a lot of games. And it's an emulator server, and it stopped the EverQuest timeline at 1999, which was the first 2 expansions. And just going back into that, I mean, I've forgotten a lot of things in 10 years. I mean, I'm sure we all have. But just the socialization, just going up to other people. And I was a brand new guy, and I went to the Common Lands and was begging for stuff. I was like, hey, I got a new dagger. Anybody got anything better? And this guy just came up to me and dropped what would have been a end-level dagger from WoW or something on me, and I looked at it, I'm like, hey, there's no item level requirement on this thing. I totally forgot that we didn't used to put this on everything. So it's just, you're like, holy crap, he could take max level gear and just give it to me as a new player, and I just forgotten that. Right? That had just moved out of my vision for what I could do with the game. And then as I was just starting and leveling in that area, I went to max level players who happened to be there trying to sell their wares because they didn't have an auction house to just put their gear on and then just go away. They were sitting there and they were hawking it like street vendors. And I was like, oh, holy crap. Hey, can you give me a buff? And he's like, yeah, sure. And he gave me a buff. And I went around and I killed things that was way too hard for me to do before he had buffed me. But without them not having an auction house, that guy never would have been there sitting in a tunnel trying to sell something. To have me come up to him, say hi, and then when my buff were out, I went back to him and I said, hey man, that was great. Could you give me another one? He's like, yeah, what'd you kill? I said, I killed this, this, and this. All of a sudden we had a conversation going, right? I mean, if you think about where the MMOs have gone, you really don't sit there and talk with anybody except your guild. And even then, and a lot of times, you just queue up for an instance, you jump in, you do the dungeon, you don't say anything to anybody, you just kind of, everyone's on autopilot. Right, so we're playing the same game, but we're playing it next to each other, never talking to each other. So when you go back to a game like Project 1999 version of EverQuest, you're like, wow, we left a lot of stuff in the dust, and we just never really got to go find what the next version was. We just all went to emulate the big guy.
So yeah, actually, and Thomas, as he mentioned, has been working with me going back all the way to Shadowbane. He's also the guy that programmed the original City Siege system on Shadowbane. So do you mind jumping in a little bit and chatting about that?
Not at all.
So, talking about the things that have been left behind in the dust, the founding principle behind Shadowbane was this dynamic make it and break it world. And we went all in on that. We had this fractal world that you could drop down your castles and you could build the cities around the castles. And there was a whole system for channeling energy and protecting the walls and the buildings and everything in it. And then there was the entire system for destroying it. And I was fairly largely involved in that. I did most of that system. And we loved it. I mean, that was one of the things I think we think back to Shadowbane, talking about that Braveheart style cast of thousands, people charging the walls. And that concept was largely left behind once everything became, you need to create a clone of WoW. So basically the way the system worked was that the city had an invulnerability to it. A challenger could come up and lay down what was called a Bane Circle. And this was basically throwing the gauntlet down and saying, we are going to come and we are going to try to destroy your city. There was a negotiation process on that because we didn't want people coming up and saying, we're going to destroy your city at 4 a.m. on Sunday night when all of you are sleeping and ready for work. So the attacker would drop the Bane Circle and the defender would then choose the time. And then combat would ensue at the appointed time and the appointed place. And there was a build up to that where you built your siege engines and they were basically pets that you trained up, you got them ready because once the shields basically drop in the walls, you would want to start to destroy them so you could create a breach and get to the heart of the city. And so for the last 10 years, 10, 15 years, we've been talking about doing that +1 from that destructible world. What if the world is entirely driven by the players? It's not this theme park that you find in the WoW style games. And then we have this anticipation and this Braveheart, this through the breach, cast of thousands conflict.
And we keep mentioning that games are expensive, but I don't know that there's a ballpark that maybe Gordon could enumerate on as to what expensive actually means to make one of these things.
It's a lot of money.
And not a lot of money.
No, well, it all depends on what you're making. So we're making a game that is more system-driven than content-driven, and all the theme parks are content-driven, which means that they have literally hundreds, if not thousands, of man-hours of custom content built specifically for you to consume once, typically, as you go through.
In 45 minutes, usually. Like I blow into an area, talk to the quest giver, blow out of that area, and I'm done with that. I don't have to go back.
And then they have taken, basically tens of man-years to create type of craziness. So, yes, big MMOs are very, very, very expensive, and they got very, very much more expensive over time. We're cheating in a bunch of ways. We're cheating because we got some back-end technology. Thank you, Thomas. We're cheating because we're using off-the-shelf engines. Thank you, Unity. Thank you, PhysX. Thank you, Voxel Farm. Thank you, a lot of things. And we're cheating because now we used to have to buy the servers, custom servers, and put them in places and have custom people to look at them and all that stuff. Thank you, Amazon. Thank you, Google. Thank you, everybody else who's doing cloud. Because all that stuff is commoditized now and immensely cheaper than it used to be, like 2 orders of magnitude cheaper. And finally, we are cheating on the side that we're doing less content, more systems. So in the end, what used to be, you couldn't even talk about an MMO without talking about multiple tens of millions of dollars. We're going to make what we're making for less than $10 million. So that's
significantly.
Yeah, so it's crazy, basically. And that's wonderful, I think. Now, if you want to build your own engine, you can go build your own engine. That's another 1.5 years and, somewhere around 4 or 5 or 6 man-years of money. So that's a bunch of money.
And there may be a very valid reason to do it, right?
Yeah.
It depends entirely on what your vision is.
Yeah, what's the game that you're trying to build it? So,
in our case, we went through, we looked at the options, and we said, hey, this combination of technologies that already exist is perfect for what we're trying to do, so that's what we're going to go and use.
and I should let Mike talk about tech a little bit, and Thomas.
I've been actually really super impressed with Unity. I mean, I started working with it, I guess about 4 years ago now, while I was still at Redfly, and got into Unity doing mobile games, and did that on my own for a while. And then Gordon and Todd approached me and said, hey, we were thinking about doing an MMO, and wondered if you had any suggestions about about an engine to use. And I'm like, oh yeah, Unity, we should do that. You know, and of course, you know, a lot of you out there, you know, at the time were like, that's crazy. You would never want to do an MMO with Unity. It's not designed for it. It won't work. Blah 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 blah. Well, fast forward until, you know, basically our Kickstarter demo, and we absolutely positively had, you know, a Unity client, a partial Unity server serving up physics. You know, we basically, you know, pounded Unity on, you know, until it did our bidding, with, you know, 200 zombies walking around and 200 physics objects, you know, running around, and me going up to a castle wall and kicking it over, and, you know, a bunch of other stuff you probably didn't see on the, you know, Crowfall video because it looked kind of poor because it was my art. So we don't do that. But I swear, you know, one of the things that I see, you know, pretty much every morning in our stand-up is we're all of us, the whole team, is in one fairly small room. And when I look at what we've accomplished in such a short time with that engine and that content pipeline with so few people, I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that we're on the right track and we're going to do great things with this tech.
Yeah, I want to say, like, I think the on any of the major MMOs, it's a good 6 months to a year before you get to what's called a walk and talk, where you basically have a plane with some terrain with a character and a chat box. And it takes considerable time just to get to that, if you're building your own engine.
Yeah, and so we had Mike coming in just as a veteran on a lot of things and a Unity expert. And when I had wandered off into the woods back in 2009, I had set out to build an MMO backend engine. And that's an easy thing to do incredibly wrong your first time around. And there's almost like a lemming cliff pull for even the most brilliant programmers to come up with something that won't scale, that won't be properly distributed and handle the persistence and the things like that. So I've gone into the wilderness and did some projects and built this back-end engine. And when we came together to form this endeavor, we're like, yeah, how can we jump to the front of the line? How can we have all this ready to go? And we basically took these really awesome Legos together and jumped off of that.
Well, you did cheat though, right? I mean, you'd already shipped 3 separate MMOs as a principal server programmer, so you at least knew one path in the minefield because we'd already cleared all the mines by hitting them on Shadowbane. So,
yeah.
Cool. So we'll probably talk a little bit about Kickstarter, about our crazy Kickstarter process, and then we'll open it up to Q&A because I'm sure there's tons of burning questions to embarrass us with. Who has a burning question to embarrass us with? Okay, that's why I'm not asking for those now.
So yeah, let's talk a little bit about the Kickstarter because it is very interesting from a timing standpoint, right? I mean, we had made the decision that we were going to do it, and we were watching what was happening with Kickstarter, and really 2012 and 2013 was the peak of the euphoria for Kickstarter. Like if you look at the top 20 games that have ever, video games specifically, that have gone on Kickstarter, I think 17 of them went in either 2012 or 2013. And so the general feeling that we were getting from people that we know in the industry who are very smart and we respect was, don't do it. Like, if you do it, you're risking your company, because here's the problem. You might have a great idea for a game, but if you go out and you go on Kickstarter and you don't take, not only do you not get any of the money because you didn't hit your target, but now everybody who has money is going to look at it and go, well, your Kickstarter didn't take, so clearly that's proof that the market is not interested in your product. So that was kind of terrifying, but we decided at some point in the process, for some crazy reason, we were like, you know what? This is what we need to do. Like, this is the plan that we came up with, and Gordon and I are incredibly stubborn at times, so we just decided we weren't going to not do it. And so we just said, we're going to go. We're going to do it, and we're going to do everything we possibly can. We made like a checklist on our whiteboard. We looked at all the ones that had taken and all the ones that had not. We made a big checklist, and then we said, okay, here's the common DNA to all the ones that have ever made it. We're going to check every single one of these boxes. So at the end of the day, if we don't take, we just didn't take, and that's either because the trend was right and just nobody's going to do it anymore, or it's because they just didn't like our game. Like the pitch, the bet that we put that there would be an audience for this game was incorrect, and there's not an audience. But it won't be for lack of us hitting and doing the work. Like the hard work was not scary to us. Maybe scary to them, but it wasn't. We were like, we're going to go and make this happen. And so, so we did. I mean, we started putting the plan in place really a year before we did it, I think.
Yeah.
So
Can I interject on that really quick?
yeah.
So just as a bullet point here, if you are thinking of going in and doing a Kickstarter, what Todd just said is really critical. There are some things that are viable in Kickstarter, and there are some things that are not. And in your risk analysis, you definitely want to consider that. And even we were considering, like, is the audience there? Can we pull this off? And now it seems natural. We did really great, but there were definitely days where, like, a little bead of sweat appears, and
Only one. So I think that the key elements was our idea differentiated enough? Could we build an audience ahead of time? So the truth of the Kickstarter thing that everyone needs to know is there is no Kickstarter audience. There is no Kickstarter audience. There's not like a whole bunch of people on Kickstarter waiting to fund your game at all. Period. Amen. What there there's some follow-on people that if they see something trending, who will come in and give you some money on top of what you've already bought to the party. So you have to bring your own audience to Kickstarter, and then you might get a 20% uptick if you trend high enough to get featured. You want to add anything?
Yeah, so when I look at Kickstarters now, and having gone through this process, it's just like they say directing a film, like every director knows exactly the right way to direct a film right when they're done shooting. Yeah, I feel the same way about Kickstarter. Like, and don't get me wrong, I'm really delighted with how well it was received, and our backers are fabulous, amazing, awesome. They're the best people in the world. They're also very handsome. But that said, it was a terrifying process to go through because you didn't know. And looking back, we had a lot of things that I'm like, okay, we hit it right on that. We did that exactly right. We had a lot of things that if I had to do it over again, I would actually change because I'm like, yeah, our video was too long, for instance, right? What we found looking at the data afterwards was that of the people who made it all the way through our video, which was 6 minutes, 7?
Closer to 8, dude.
Closer to 8. Time flies. The people who made it through that video, we had a huge amount of conversion from those watchers to people who actually funded. It was like a third or something like that.
More than 1 in 3.
1 in 3 people who watched our video actually became a backer, and that's amazing, right? Unfortunately, of the people who started our video, like 1 in 8 or
no, 1 in 5 made it through.
Okay, 1 in 5. See, this is why he handles the numbers.
Yeah. I should be dyslexic now, so I can really mess that up.
When I look at Kickstarter, I look at, and I kind of look at them at the beginning now, and I say, okay, how do I think this is going to do? I think it's kind of, to me, a function of 3 things. Number 1 is what is their reach? Because at some point, it's just about eyeballs. How many eyeballs are going to come and take a look at your page and take a look at your video? And if they don't look at it, they have exactly 0 chance of backing you. So number 1 is reach. Number 2 is credibility. How believable is it that they think this team can actually get this done? So that's where those first 2, us having names in the industry, that did really help, right? The reach, it came into the reach because it meant that if we called the press would say, oh, this is kind of interesting, and they might write a story about us. They don't always. We had some people pass on us that were like, wow, really? That's kind of lame. Thanks, guys. But so number 1 is that reach.
But then they covered us on the second day.
They did, and yeah. And then number 2 is credibility. And they're like, okay, these are guys that done before. But the number 3, which is actually the most important, is what are you pitching? Like, is it a compelling idea that people actually care about? So when I kind of rank them, those are the things that I look at. So that what Gordon was talking about, which is bringing your own audience day 1, that's part of that first part, which is reach. And the piece he alluded to, which is, and if you get the momentum, if you can get that early momentum, now it feeds on itself because all of a sudden the press is more likely to pick you up on day 2. And so you now get more reach. And all those people who go to Kickstarter and actually land on the front page, you come up as a what's new and hot because you had such good day 1 numbers. So now they're going to click on you, which means that some percentage of them will decide they like you and they'll go ahead and back you, which means that you go higher on another list and you make it off to other sites that now pick you up. So it kind of, the momentum either lifts you up or smashes you down. So that's the basic.
Yeah, you either get the momentum or you don't.
Yeah.
Big Mo is important in any kind of game, really. How many people in here back stuff on Kickstarter? All right, so you know that when you back stuff, you also get emails or messages about, hey, your friend just backed such and such. So that network of people on Kickstarter who are backing things basically feed that momentum for you. So you're getting you have another network effect beyond your other social media. Kickstarter is also a piece of social media.
So another thing, I totally was surprised by this. I didn't expect it going in. Was people who are on Kickstarter do have a tendency to try and share each other's stories. Now you can't just do all of them, because you can't go to your backers and check out these 30 games. That'll really annoy them, right? But you can generally, dropping one or two every now and then is considered a pretty cool thing to help other people with their projects. And what we noticed was it was actually additive. Like if we would mention somebody and they would mention us, the fear, of course, is no, I don't want to do that because people only have X dollars they're going to spend. What I've actually noticed, and I think what is more true, is that people, they back things more. It's a passion sell. This is an impulse buy. This is not a budget thing where gamers are like, and this month I'm going to spend $20 on games, and if there are good ones out, great, and if there's not, I'm still spending that $20. They don't work that way, right? It's like, holy crap, that game looks amazing. I got to find some money. I guess I won't eat for 3 days, right? I mean, it's a different type of mentality. So what we noticed was that collaborating like that and saying, hey, check these guys out too, was actually accretive to both groups, and the fans generally thought it was cool. I mean, you don't want to overplay that card, obviously, because you don't ever want to have people feel like you're just spamming them. But as long as and I wouldn't do it unless it was a project I actually thought was really cool, right? But if it is a project that's really cool and you mention it, usually that helps everybody. So
talk about the teaser campaign.
Okay, so the teaser campaign was interesting. So here was our thought going into this whole thing: is Gordon and I have names in the industry, meaning press people know us. And some segment of the really hardcore gamers know us. But like, Shadowbane, that's a 10-year-old game now, and it was buggy at launch, right? So it wasn't like the greatest calling card. My follow-on games were massively successful, but it was within a small group of people that were like 8 to 12, and they aren't really on Kickstarter. So that wasn't really, so I had kind of a slice of people over here that were like Shadowbane loyalists who might be interested, and then I had some Wizard parents who were like, oh, that might be kind of cool, I'll check it out because I like Todd's last game. Gordon had the same kind of effect. He had a sliver of the Galaxies people and a sliver of the UO people. So since we didn't have like Chris Roberts does, right? He owns Wing Commander. Like he is intimately tied with that, and it's a giant audience that he can go to and say, I'm giving you that. And they'll be like, that's awesome, because that's what we want from you. We didn't have that, so we talked about our approach, and we decided that what we needed to do was aggregate that community before we got to Kickstarter, and we would have to come from a lot of different places. So we were going to try and basically kind of do strikes and targeted strikes with targeted messages into particular communities that we thought would hopefully resonate with some group in there and get their interest enough that they would come. And by hitting all these different communities, we would collect enough people that would really get and like our vision. And we also knew that doing that meant that we were going to probably turn off at least 1 in 5 of the people that we talked to.
Or more.
Or more.
So in fact,
right?
Part of our challenge was our vision was so radical that we were concerned that if we just laid it out on everybody, we would be dismissed as the lunatics of the game business completely.
And it's such a bizarre, weird, like conglomeration of elements from Game of Thrones and EVE Online, and this is from Shadowbane, and this is actually a trick from Galaxies. And this, it was so many different things that made it up that we have had the worst time, like, explaining it in an elevator pitch. Like, what is this game about? Right? So because of that, I mean, we decided, okay, here's the right approach then. Let's kind of why don't we turn the reveal of what this game is into a game? Like, why don't we make that, and I kept equating it to like the first season of Lost, which is by far the best season in my opinion, where you know what the truth is, but you're not going to just lay that out. Instead, you're going to tease it. And I didn't want to make that like a marketing gimmick, like a trick. So instead, I said, okay, day one, here's our teaser site. We're going to play a game, and the game is called Can You Guess What's in the Box? If you're not interested in the game of Guess What's in the Box, come back when this countdown timer expires, and I'll just show you what's in the box. So now, if you aren't into that, then you don't have to put up with it. But if you are into that idea, if you like that and you think that's a cool idea, we're going to tease this out slowly. And it was funny because the response to that was basically, hey, this is really cool, or they're full of crap, it's WoW. That was like, it was one or the other. Like, I'm into this idea, or they're lying, it's totally WoW. And what was great for us was we knew it was in the box, and we knew it might be crazy, it might be that people don't like it, and I mean, but we knew one thing, and we knew it was not WoW. So we knew at least that group would be eating crow. See what I did there? Yeah. Nice, right? And I'm out. So we knew that we were building towards that, and at the end of the day, the reveal wouldn't be like the perfect game for everybody. There's no game that's the perfect game for everybody. But we knew that it actually would be different, and that there was some subset of the MMO players out there who different is better. Right, like at Groundhog Day, doesn't he say that? Anything different is better. I think that's the feeling we were going.
You need to stop now.
All right, there you go. I already said I'm out. You're supposed to take the mic.
Well, I tried, but you continued. So here's the interesting thing. So by the time we launched our Kickstarter, we had aggregated 54,000 people had signed up on our site to get a beta slot. And our hope was that enough of those people would show up and back us. So on day one, 5,000 people backed us out of 54,000. So we had to gather 54,000 people to get 5,000 people to show up on day one. In the end, we had almost 18,000 people back us over the course of the campaign. So it just goes to show you've got to have a lot of eyeballs to get to the point where you can actually get big numbers. And for an MMO, we needed big numbers. Choosing our starting number was challenging. We had to basically scale back the game we were going to build to a core module game to get that number down to the point where, what did we want? We wanted to fund our main game in 72 hours or less. Because when you look at all the Kickstarters out there, if you don't get 40% of your money, in the first 72 hours, you probably aren't going to fund. Or you're going to struggle really hard to fund. And if you get less than 25% in the first 72 hours, you aren't going to fund, almost certainly, unless some magic thing happens. So we studied all the successful and a bunch of the unsuccessful Kickstarters to understand what the patterns were so that we wouldn't go in and not know where we were as we were navigating those 30 days. So that was a big part of what we were, everything we were doing was trying to create an outcome that was the outcome that we wanted. And it was still challenging. We were sweating bullets on day one, even as it took off. We were sweating bullets on day one, we were sweating bullets on day 30 at the end, frankly. Actually, I'm still sweating bullets because the money hasn't hit the bank account. So until the check clears, it's not a deal, is my experience. Because I've been in the game business too long.
So in terms of managing the Kickstarter, so what we did is we basically, leading up that 60-day period beforehand, we got those 30-day calendars, that you can use whiteboard pens to write on, and we basically hung 3 of them in a row on a wall, and we got little sticky notes, and every drop that we had an idea that we were going to do, which was a piece of concept art or a video segment or an interview or an FAQ or whatever, got put on a sticky note. And we would just tag them on every day. What are we going to do today? What are we going to release today? That when you combine it all at the end is the big reveal that explains the whole game. So if somebody's watching all the pieces all the way along, by the end they know what the game is. And so we were in a constant state of rearranging those things to try and make it have the most impact. And we were able to adjust in real time to like, oh, okay, well, we thought they'd be more excited about this concept, but they actually thought that was not very cool. So, you know what? We know they're going to love this FAQ, so let's move it up and we'll put it tomorrow. But that means we're going to have to bounce this interview segment that we were going to do over to this day. So we were always readjusting that to try and maximize, to keep the attention and keep the excitement going. And I think we did a pretty good job on
it. And we burned up all our content about 2 times as fast as we planned, because we did actually have a plan going in, and the plan met the enemy, and the enemy killed us.
Well, and there also was, MMOs are big. I mean, we all know this. They're massive. So trying to explain it in an elevator pitch, you're going to end up with, it's WoW, but Jedi, or WoW and superheroes. And people are going to start digging through and go, this game, you're looking for the thing you don't like, oh, full loot in PvP, I'm out, right? And they don't even give the rest of the game a chance. So by us revealing it piecemeal over time, it gave people a day or so to digest.
Yeah.
They were able to actually go, okay, I understand what this game is. It's nothing like WoW, and there's a lot of these cool things, but now, after those first couple sessions, they've kind of bought into it, right? So it's not, here's the bomb of an MMO, and it's WoW plus this, and you figure out the thing you don't like so you can just bail till it comes out. So for us, it really was exciting to see people try and figure the things out, plus giving them time to digest what the game was.
And even argue about it.
Yeah, actually, so I'll pass it right back to Thomas. So I can remember any number of times when we had conversations where we put out some information, and what we found out after that was they didn't, like the audience didn't get it at all. And it's because in our mind, we were mapping it to what's in the box. We know the entire design of this game, but we hadn't included X, Y, or Z piece. So.
Yeah, and that's a great point, was the mental model, because we talked about this every day, and people would try and map it to WoW or Galaxies, and we would reveal this piece, and it would just, Guild Wars is another one, and they would just go, oh, it's this. Oh, well, the next day, no, it's not this, it's like this. So a lot of times, Todd and I were going to conclusions that, oh, they're going to see this, and then they're going to know how our campaigns work. But in fact, they didn't get it at all because they were mapping a campaign world to Shadowbane, a persistent world. And because we never said that the worlds are transitory and they go away after the campaigns, they were already creating problems that we knew didn't exist. So that was creating another interesting issue, was people were, again, trying to find that I'm out moment. They really want to get out as soon as possible because they go, oh, this is the thing I don't like, I'm bailing now.
And a bunch of people did bail.
And they did, and they bailed at different times. So it was interesting, once we announced that we're going to a Kickstarter, a lot of our early people who were there from day one when we released the teaser site, we just never saw them on the forums again. Tully was watching for them, and we just noticed that there's just a lot of people who aren't interested in waiting the period of time it takes to make a game. So they're out. They want to play a finished product, and that's what they thought.
Which is actually fine.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not for everybody. A lot of people want to, they don't want to anticipate the meal. They want to eat the meal.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So I think, that just gives you an idea about how many people came from Kickstarter, which was 25%, versus how many came from everywhere else. And only 25% of them came directly from our site, for example. So, your audience doesn't necessarily come from Kickstarter. So everybody who's thinking about a Kickstarter, don't think, I'm just going to throw it up there and there's going to be wonderful people there waiting to back me. They are not there. And in fact, those Kickstarter people would have never shown up if we weren't trending on Kickstarter already. Because you can look at other people's campaigns and pretty much see that. So we should do Q&A because we're getting close to end of time. And anybody with Valor? Go ahead, Josh. And then we'll do Valor.
So based on the data...
Actually, let me give you a mic.
Do you want to use this one? This one works, Gordon.
Well, that one works too. You just got to hold it.
So my question is based on the data up here. So very minimal actually came internally from, well, a good amount, but internally you got more from direct traffic. So were those people who knew directly where to go that found from other types of marketing outside, or is it just
Who the hell knows?
Yeah, and that's the thing, is you don't know. There's a level of kind of unattributed traffic that you kind of just never know where it comes from. Some of them will be people who they were actually on our site, but for some reason decided to not click on the button and instead just type it in. Some people come through Google. Some people say, hey, check this out. You need to look at this thing over somebody else's shoulders. You kind of never know. And then the bigger you get in terms of your internet presence, the more you don't know.
Yeah, the chart that's up there now is how many people watched the video and then how many people finished the video, just to give you a sense.
My question was, you obviously built a community prior to going to Kickstarter. Why the timeline that you took? When did you know we have enough people? Now is the time to do our Kickstarter.
Well, we made a guess as to how much lead-up time we wanted, but we never, even the first day when we came in and did, 400 and whatever thousand we were still scared going to bed that night. Like, we never hit a point where we're like, yeah, we got this. After we hit the number, we're like, all right, then I guess, so that money will clear, right?
Maybe.
Maybe.
I was wondering how, or what did you find was the best way to drive people to your site so that they knew you existed?
I'll say being outrageous. What are you going to say, Todd?
That there's not a silver bullet. Unfortunately, there's just not. Like, we sat on social media all day, every day, having it up in the background. We reached out to old fans that we had that were fans of other games. Called
in every favor from everybody we've ever known.
So
every relative had to put in $1, all that stuff.
Like during the Kickstarter, this is going to sound crazy. So Gordon and I have been doing this a long time, and we have a pretty large amount of industry contacts and just contacts in general, like on LinkedIn and stuff like that. We emailed them all directly. Like individually, not a mass email. Hey Bob, do you remember that time we had lunch that time and I told you, well, I need you to give me $1. It seemed kind of artificial and sad. It's like, hey, how's it going? By the way, I need some money. And I know I'm just asking you for money and that's kind of lame, but give me some money. But we did it anyway because it was just like, we've now invested our own money, our own time. We have team members who they have some families and they expect to be paid and stuff like that. So we have to make this work. So we just got over the shyness of calling people up and saying, look, if you're not interested in the game at all, it'd be cool if you gave $1. If you're not interested in giving $1 because you just think that's kind of lame, that's fine. A tweet would be great. And if not, thank you for even reading the email and considering it. All right?
So in fact, one of the tricks of Kickstarter is it's not about dollars, it's about people. Because they're in the acquisition business too. Kickstarter is in the business of acquiring new people on Kickstarter. They know what the value of every new person who signs up for Kickstarter is. So they're encouraging us to get more people on Kickstarter. So every time that you can get one of your family members to come on, sign up, go through Amazon Payments and give you an actual $1, they've gotten another person for Kickstarter who might back something else in the future. And in fact, so when you're trending on your first day, they're looking for a number of people who are giving money, period. They're not looking at how many people look at the screen, they're looking at how many people back you and relative to what you're asking for. So there's games that only end up getting like $30,000 that end up trending and getting on the front page. So it can happen for anybody, but it's all about those first day numbers. So everything about any Kickstarter campaign should be focused on how can I get the most velocity of people on day one. And if you have to ask everyone you've ever met for $1 to do it, get ready to do that. Get ready to grovel, get ready to lose whatever pride you have left, and just do it.
Yeah, I hit the family members who, hey, I bought Girl Scout cookies from your kids for 5 years. I did jump rope contests for your kids. The bike rides that I had to back. It was like, all right, you can give me a couple bucks, but make sure to do it the first day we go live on that Tuesday, because that day one velocity is critical.
But in truth, those people didn't really matter because our average per backer, which isn't up there anymore, was $104. So the fact that they might drag down your average is not as important as getting the velocity. Hang on, we'll bring the microphone. I shouldn't just point, I should bring the mic.
So of all the amounts that you could have made as your goal, why 800,000? You can be as general as you want to be.
So
no, thank you.
No. We sat down and we said, okay. So we had kind of a top-down and a bottoms-up approach, right? We said, okay, what is the overall vision of this game that we want to do, and let's keep that in mind. But then we need to also spec out what is the minimum that gives somebody a full play experience. And that's where we went for that. So we also raised money. So we had other ways to fund as well that we had already brought to the table beforehand. So we said, okay, well let's figure out what that core module is and let's set a price for that. And we actually went in and adjusted it right before we went out. We were talking about maybe we should do 6. God, that makes us nervous. And we were just like, all right, we're going to go up a little bit. We felt strong enough going into it that we're like, all right, let's be a little bit more conservative and ask for a little bit more, and let's hope that we don't later kick ourselves because we make $764,000 and we don't quite make the 8, and as a result, you know, we could have tried to scrape by and got it done, but we didn't take. So that was agonizing. I wish there was actually a science to it, but there really wasn't. I will say that we went into it and we looked at the number of email signups and we're like, all right, so we have 54,000 signups, so what if 20% of them convert? And we were just wrong on those numbers, right? Those were guesses. And you know, we still needed that following. We had to have that because that's what gave us the spread and the initial audience, and those initial 5,000 people are, like I said, amazing people who I will be forever indebted to. But yeah, it's more art than science.
Yeah, I actually had a question about the art workflow. Like, was it at all difficult integrating the voxel system? Because that's such a new thing. I was actually curious about that.
I can talk about it.
Yeah.
That would be a yes. Yeah.
So I mean, any technology person who hears the word voxels, you know, instantly will get a bit of an ice cold shiver down your back. You know, this is not it's not easy technology. Of course, you know, the technology provider that we chose, you know, wasn't you know, they'd done it before, well, Landmark, obviously. And so, you know, they had already been working with it for some time. It's why we chose them. You know, I would definitely say it's one of our highest risk points, but we've got some really great stuff already, and you know, you'll have to see more when it comes out. But yeah, it's going to get a lot of our focus and a lot of our attention. You know, performance, data size, you know, all those things are very, very important to us. But what's most important to Todd and the gamers, obviously, is how does it look, right? You know, you don't want to have, you know, a great, you know, physical space that doesn't look great. And so we're not going to stop when it just comes to making it physically work. We want it to look fantastic and immerse you in the environment as well. And that's a big ticket item.
So you guys have talked about some of the challenges involved with Kickstarter in general and finding that funding. I mean, you have also mentioned some of the experience you have as a team. Did you ever try to leverage that experience and find maybe, quote unquote, more traditional ways to fund the project, publishing partners or things like that?
Well, we did. So actually, I having been through this process now, other than an IPO, I think I've actually raised money for my projects almost every way a person can. So I've done funding myself to the degree that I can. I'm not like Notch or something like that, right? But you know, I've done funding myself, which is always terrifying. I've done angel funding from, you know, friends and family and from people who are kind of professional angels. My first company was venture backed, so I actually had venture capitalists involved, so I've been down that. And Shadowbane has the distinction, I think, of having the most number of major publishers of any launch title ever. Between Europe, North America, and Asia, we had 7 different publishers between inception and launch. So I've done it basically every way you can do it. And King's Island was funded by one individual who owned the company and was the CEO. So I've kind of gone through the whole gambit. There's no free money everywhere, right? It's always a challenge. Every time you go looking, there's always a give and a take. So on this one, we did our own money. We pulled in some strategic money. We did friends and family. Mostly though, it wasn't actually friends and family so much as industry contacts that led us to small amounts, you know, relative to an MMO. It's still a lot of money relative to an individual.
That's our board where we were working our series of angels and VC people.
Yeah.
When we were looking for money early on.
So there was at least a 6-month period where Gordon and I spent at least half of our day every day on that whiteboard tracking, and it was just a sales pipeline, right? It's just like, all right, and we got another person who's interested that we met through this industry contact, so put them on the board, and then we would call them and meet with them and try and tell them what we're doing, and they would tell us they're crazy or that they're only interested in mobile or whatever, and then we would cross them off the list. But you know, you take that giant list there of, I don't know how many it was, probably 100.
It ranged, you know, from 60 to 80 all the time.
Yeah, and it went down
changing.
to 8 or 12 that actually end up saying, yes, I'm interested enough to give you some money. And So, but this was a new one. I hadn't done crowdfunding before, so now we've done that.
Okay, Kickstarter, I want to talk about your other game, Crowfall. I wonder if you could talk about the technology and sort of the mashup of the, particularly the infrastructure building blocks that you were alluding to earlier. Because, you know, you sort of have a game salad of MMOs starting to happen here, and the industry's shifting, right? I mean, the mashup means that other competitors can come in more quickly and so forth. So I just wonder if you could talk about those building blocks.
I'll cover a bit of it, and I'll have Mike sort of handle the second part of it. Part of the big infrastructure is you have to have all these things to persist your characters, to enter the world, to validate accounts, to bring up servers, to distribute that. In a classical MMO, you also have the problem that in your first day of the game, you're going to get more people than you're going to ever get again in that game hitting the servers at the same time. And if, God forbid, there is a technical issue, they'll all be sitting hitting the login button waiting for it to come back up. So you have to have this infrastructure that's going to handle it. So we built that out with a series, this is my Tornado 2 technology, which is built off of residual knowledge from Shadowbane and from Pirates of the Burning Sea and from Wizard 101 and previous projects I've worked on. There's an interesting part to that, which is that we've got a platform technology we're working with, and then the Unity aspect of it is, I think, groundbreaking, and I'm hoping we're going to get to do a GDC talk on this. I'm going to let Mike speak to that in a moment. But so we're taking this classical, get you logged into this universe where you're detecting other people and we're distributing you. We've got this platform aspect where we want to be able to handle all the web stuff and anything we're letting you do in addition on that. And that's some of that's being determined, and some of it's just necessary as part of the crowdfunding and having people, you know, they get a castle and we want to make sure that castle appears in the world. And then finally, there's the actual, like, making this dynamic voxel world have physics type stuff, and that's kind of the groundbreaking thing.
So a lot of you programmers out there are going to call me completely crazy. And I wouldn't feel like I'm completely crazy, except for the fact that I'm actually watching this thing work in our office. You know, so I'm not completely crazy. Basically, the architecture on the client side is a straight up Unity client. You know, it communicates with Thomas's technology via TCP/IP, pretty classic MMO architecture. But behind Thomas's architecture is another Unity headless service, and it actually makes the physics world work. So it's using all of the Unity rigid bodies and all the game objects that you would be very familiar with. If you were doing a single player game, this would all be on one side, right? But imagine you have a prefab that has server components and client components, and on the server side, it only looks at the server components, and on the server side, it only looks at server components, and on the client side, it only looks at the client components. And in the middle is Thomas's tech, that's actually making, persistence work, the database work, the scaling work, and also on the physics server side, it's also communicating with Voxel Farm to do the physical geometry, so that as you carve out something, it'll say, okay, the geometry is different, so that you can actually walk down into whatever hole that you carved out on. But the voxel service also works on the client side because you have to see what it's doing. So there's quite a bit of secret sauce that goes on in there, and maybe not every single bit of it has been figured out, but we can have some time to figure some of this out. So
it does work.
A little time. It does work. It does absolutely work. So yeah, I think we're very happy with it. I think the biggest questions that we have are how many people and how many things can be moving around in the densest areas possible, right? So those questions, are still yet to be answered. But the greatest thing about doing that is we have this dial on the Amazon cloud where we can turn up a really big, compute engine to make it really work really well. And if you have a lot of people in your MMO and they all want to play, and that's a great problem to have. So there you go.
Next question. I actually had two quick questions, one on the tech and one on the VC side. For the tech, what made you go with Unity versus Unreal or any other engine? I mean, how did you make those decisions?
Give me that one! Give me that one!
Neither one of you.
So the easy answer is almost everyone who's done an MMO on Unity has walked a trail of pain.
Unreal.
Unreal, sorry, not Unity, but Unreal has walked a very difficult trail of pain.
I would say any project.
But in essence, using anybody's engine for an MMO is always a pain because they're not really made for an MMO. They're not really set up for that. So, it's just pick your poison. Might be the easy way to put it.
Okay.
Plus, it costs a shitload of money and you pay them a bunch of royalties. So we don't want that.
And
to tail on Gordon's there, and I know Unreal is getting a lot of press right now. They're trying to push it into a lot of schools. I've answered this question to a couple private messages that I've been sent on our forums, which is there is a fine detail to that. Unreal is free, which is anytime you make more than $3,000, you owe them a 5% royalty for the lifetime of your project every quarter. So their example is if you put a game out on Unreal to the Apple Store, Apple takes 30% right off the bat, and then Unreal takes another 5%. So you get $6.50 before you even start taking expenses and taxes and all of that out. So it's just another bit. So you have to figure out, is it worthwhile in the long term to pay that royalty, or if you want to just buy a different product?
And the other question was on the VC.
Can I add one more thing? really important. I don't know how many in here have used Unity versus Unreal or CryEngine or perhaps EdTech or Hammer. Those a lot of engines out there. I have never seen production velocity as fast as what Unity provides. Period. From the moment you want to get something up and running, well, I'll just say, the last time I worked as a programmer in any capacity was actually quite a while ago. It was on Ironstorm's Thief Deadly Shadows project. I spent 6 months working on a third-person camera. I did that in Unity in 2 days.
Go ahead.
The last question was on the VC side. When you were approaching these different investors to try to get money, where were you at as far as your design doc and concept art? Did you have much of anything to show?
Can I do it? Can I start?
Yeah, sure.
They don't care. They care about the business. Investors are not investing in games. Investors are investing in businesses, right? So they want to know that you're credible to do it. But if they're literally neck deep in your design, they're not actually an investor.
Here's the thing: is with venture capitalists as a whole, generally speaking, they don't invest in game companies. I mean, that's a general rule, but it's more true than it's not true. You can get a lot of times meetings because people are happy to talk to you and see what you're up to, and you never know. Maybe there's some piece of technology that you have that you don't realize could be used not in games that would be really valuable. And with our backgrounds, we can probably get a meeting, and they'll even look at it. They'll even look at the financials. But what happened almost every time is we get to the final decision, and they would look at it and they'd come back and they'd say, guys, we even had one tell us directly. It's like, your business model looks great. Your team looks fantastic. You guys have great names. We believe. Everything you're saying sounds great. We just can't get over the fact that you're a game company. It just seems to us like betting on a movie, and we don't bet on movies. So if you were an accounting software company or you were some kind of cool app, then we'd probably do it. But sorry. And so we got that enough times that we actually stopped calling VCs. Certainly not just kind of random VCs. We would call if we had some particular reason, like somebody told us you should talk to this guy, or if it was just hey, this is a good person to know and they might know somebody else, we would have those conversations. But we stopped just doing cold call this VC firm, because they're just not interested.
It was mentioned earlier that Crowfall would be more systems focused rather than content focused.
Yeah, it has to be, right?
And I'm wondering if that's changed your approach to the separation we see in most MMOs, where there's leveling content and then there's in-game content. And then there's usually a hard separation between those. And has that changed your philosophy of how those things relate to each other?
Yeah, we just cut the leveling content and went straight to the in-game. If we can't afford to do both, then we don't. And the people who are going to be interested in Crowfall are there for the end game. So why force them to go through hundreds or thousands of hours of content to get to the game they actually want? So, oh yeah, hold on.
Yeah, I'd love to jump on this one because my first game team was the EverQuest 1 team, and I want to say we had 10 designers, and that was largely a system-focused game with raid bosses at the end of zones. And then on Galaxies, we probably had anywhere from 15 to 20. And then on DC Universe Online, which was WoW plus superheroes in an action combat setting, we had a design team of 45 people. So you can see how quickly you get to when you have to build that linear content, you just need an exponential amount of people. And then you also have to break your game into two pieces. There's the, I'm gonna walk uphill barefoot in snow to get to the end game, right? And then you have to build an end game that will sustain that community on a long time. So, and you see this on the forums from the every 2-year WoW expansion, is a lot of folks just don't like doing the quest stuff. They just want to get to doing raid bosses over and over again because they do that for so long, and then they have to go play this other thing to get back into doing that. So not having to go through any of that for us is kind of refreshing.
That's the expensive part.
And it's really expensive.
So now that you've had this funding success, all right, what's the future? What's the size of your team, and what's your development schedule? And you got time frames and target dates.
We're doomed. No. You can't run far enough and fast enough today to make that work. And it's not who we are anyway.
It's not the money to do that.
I mean, the truth is, our team has already grown a little bit. We'll grow a little bit more over time. And we put out a date. We said what day we were going to ship this game, and we're working toward that date right now. So both Todd and I have a lot of production experience putting out games. We have a pretty good idea about how to do this, and there aren't that many unknowns left in it, as much as Mike is worried. And he should be worried because that's his job. Look at him, he's like biting his nails. But the truth is that it's not that horrifying. Even though we are doing, in general, a lot of horrifying things at one time, we tried to de-risk a lot of that before we went to Kickstarter, so that we could say to ourselves, okay, can we be credible? Because the last thing that we want to be is like out there 2 years from now and go with a bunch of egg on our faces, going, oh yeah, by the way, we were idiots. Thanks for the money. But that won't work out in the long term. So that's not what we're up to.
How many people are you?
We're 20 today, I think. We were like 16, 17 before, now we're 20. We might be 25 in a month or two. And that's about where we'll stay in that range for probably most of the time that we're building the game. Any other questions? Because we're way over time.
One other quick question. I don't have my phone. I'm loud enough. All right, I have to use it. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming out. This has been a great event for me so far. Particular question is it towards NDA for content, because I'm a streamer online. What can I look forward to being able to produce for my viewers and my community as opposed to not being able to talk about in the future?
Well, because you ask, you will get the only NDA that we're putting out for streaming. Everyone else is NDA free. That we already announced that some time ago. We decided that we would just, why row upstream against the people who are helping you promote the game? We should just be NDA free for people who. We shouldn't put something out unless we're willing to have it streamed or YouTubed. Is where we came down on it, and it's risky, right? So again, we're being kind of crazy again, but we just can't help it. There's something wrong with us. Anybody else have a last question? Anybody but John? Pretty much John. All right, the gentleman next to you, and then maybe you'll have time for you.
I have a design question. So you talk about how leveling content is strikingly inefficient in terms of both time, money, and you hear critics and users always complaining about grind, about how it's basically a second job, and after they come home every day, they don't want to go to a second job. So why do people do it?
Are you going to tell us the truth?
Todd's looking at me, I'm looking at him. Why do they do it? I mean, initially that is your experience when you get into the game, right? You don't start out, but you hear great things about the end. Oh, it's going to be so much fun.
I'm talking from the development side.
Oh, why do we build it from the development side?
Right.
Right, because,
WoW
did it. Yeah, WoW, because WoW did it is a good reason. But generally, what I've found in talking to other designers, is that they were mandated at some point to produce X amount of hours of content for their project. I think I went to a GDC once and I heard that City of Heroes had to have something like 350 hours of content at launch. And so what they did is they put in a lot of really grindy levels so that you would have to go through them and they could go and 350, and then they would tune to that point. So a lot of times it's mandated on you and you have no choice.
Well, I think that, I can speak to it not from design, but from production. So when you think about the business side, what everyone who's making an MMO wants is to keep you long enough to where you get to where you pay a subscription, right? And once you pay a subscription for 2 months, your likelihood of staying a long time is much higher. Right, and now you're invested and you start, and so one of the rules that we're breaking, and that was one of the rules, one of the business rules, is that you needed enough content to keep you long enough to be a subscriber, and to be a subscriber long enough to where it was a habit. And once it's a habit, then we got we're your venue for play. So that, and that was taken from earlier games. They weren't even designed to be subscription games, actually. They were just designed to take your time.
And that's one of the reasons that we're going to experiment with this time-based skill model is we know people's time is valuable and they want to be advancing while they're not online. And we know that a lot of the other systems that we could have tried usage-based, for example, just lead to bots and things like that. And then everyone feels they have to compete because it's a PvP game. So the offline advancement lets you go to work and you feel good that your character is still advancing. So the challenge there is to make you feel good when you get in interactively playing as well. But we're going to try, again, we're going to try and experiment with some of these models.
So yeah, the other thing that to me is really interesting about the passive training, the fact that I get on, I send my guy to train, and then I can disappear for 3 weeks, right? When I come back, Blair, who's been playing every night for 3 hours while I was gone, isn't necessarily more powerful than me. He may have better skills than me because he's honed his skills, but his character is not given a big advantage. So I don't like to use the word casual because we're not talking about casual players. We're talking about hardcore players who don't have the time that we used to, right? You've got kids. You can't afford to take 3 hours every night without losing your family. So being able to still be not at a disadvantage and be able to, but have an intermittent schedule to play, that was really, really compelling. I liked that idea. So it's a risk. It's certainly not the norm. But we looked at what Eve had done and we thought that was really cool. But we also thought, okay, we think we could do that, but be more friendly from a pricing standpoint. So we talked through all this stuff and then we talked about how can we make something that really is different? And it is risky, but at the same time, if we didn't want risky, we wouldn't have started this company.
Last question.
All right, so your green bar is messing with my gravitas here, but there's a quote behind it. It says, I think it was like, it's like Game of Thrones meets EVE Online. But it's always been in quotes. Do you remember who said that first?
I don't know.
You did, John.
Well, I think by putting in quotes is legal as much as anything else, right? We're not actually claiming ownership of either of those things.
Okay.
So
it just sounded like an unattributed quote.
Yeah, I don't know. We certainly have called it that. We've actually struggled with that line. The game is, like I said, very hard to put into a single bucket. I just posted about this actually. It's hard to just say, here's the game in a couple words. But when you put up your Kickstarter, they give you literally just enough room for a couple words. And so as much as I don't like the Hollywood, method of marketing of, it's like Avatar meets League of Their Own. Which would be a very terrible movie. I don't like that, but I understand why people do it.
Where did these things come from? All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming, and I'll give to
what I want you to do, and I'm using the mic so people who are streaming will get this. You all have huge social networks, your social. If you haven't given, and you may not be into MMOs, this is an awesome company, you've heard about these awesome people, I would urge you to get on there and just give them, I know it's NPR Pledge Week, but it's Crowfall Pledge Month. They're going to need a lot more money than listening to, Radio Lab.
We didn't mention that, but we are still collecting pledges.
Yeah, they are. So it's crowfall.com. Do it and really tell your whole network. Okay, let's see if we get a surge going here for these guys, so they keep doing this. They have,
Yeah, we have buttons
have
up here
tchotchkes
and little cards, so if anybody wants one, they're in the Hello Panda box, so come on.
Give these people
Pull a button out of the
a
Hello
huge
Panda
round of
box.
applause there. For County and Warriors taking on this challenge. Thank you for coming.
And by the way, any of you who have already backed us, again, I just want to say thank you so much for putting your faith in us. It's huge to us. It literally is a life-changing thing, so thank you.